Okay, hello. This is a supplemental recording. I know I've spent a lot of time on the material for this week, and I promise you this will not be as long as the last video, but I just couldn't resist putting the cherry on the top and showing you something having to do with surfaces. So as you remember, here's where we left off. We've got basically this wonderful marble chess set in kind of like maybe a study atmosphere. This is where studious people would go to wrestle intellects against each other. So let's go ahead and maybe play around with this a little bit. And so here's the trick. I'm going to leave basically modeler and layout alone for the most part, but one correction I have to make. If you look here, you'll notice the crowns on the kings, they're facing the wrong way. And that's the sort of thing that would bother me because that's how I think. So if I come out of virtual progressive render and I select the king, and basically I go to rotate, and in this case it'll be a little, oh, that's the queen, so undo that one. Select the king and rotate the king, so that's the correct rotation. And I know the pivot point's wrong, but I'm just going to move the king back where the king belongs on the other side of the queen, and I'm going to go to the perspective view just to make sure that I'm doing this right. Yeah, that's where the king is, and we'll come back to this. And so then here, once I've done that, I believe that's the other king. Nope, it's not. That's the other king. So I'm going to rotate that one too, even though it'll be hard to see. Yep, that's right. I can tell as I saw it going by. And so then if I move the king just back where the king belongs, of course I could have just moved the pivot point, but wow. And there he is. Oh, put him back where he belongs, let go of it. All right, so then I'm going to go back to the camera view, and I'm going to go back to virtual progressive render. And so there is our chess set, there is our study. And just to document it, I'm going to hit the F9 button. And as you remember, we have this setting up to record high definition. So I'm going to replace the picture that I had originally recorded with this one because I don't want the client to see that the crowns were in the wrong place. Not that it's a huge thing, but it matters to me. So I'm going to go to PNG 24 because I don't need the alpha channel. And I'm going to create a folder here called exports. Now, I always do that when I'm working on a project for a client because I want to make sure that I can find their stuff quickly. And I'm going to call this Studious. Not sure if I spelled that right, but it doesn't actually matter. And so there is my Studious chess set. And so what I wanted to do is offer an alternative. Let us say that we're going to gradually change the character of this room. So to start with, why don't we just look at the background? Let's say instead of a study, we want a more casual atmosphere. So if I go to my surface editor and I go to the chess, and there is wall, and if I go to there's my image, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to add a different image. I'm just going to load a different image, and I happen to have found a few more. And there was one in particular. How about a beach pub environment? Let's say we go for this one. So how does that look? That's a completely different approach to this. And so if we're going to do that, then we've got a couple of issues we've got to tackle, but we will tackle them. So I'm going to go ahead and use this, this image. Now, let's say we're in that environment. This is like a pub type place. And so we're going to ignore the fact that the table's a completely different design. But if we wanted to, we could probably match that. But the first thing I want to do is I want to say we don't want a marble chess set. What we want instead is a wooden one. So let's say I go to my pawn 1. Actually, let's start with the board itself. So if I go to black, let's say I go to my surface, and I'm just going to go ahead and load another image. And instead of, I'm going to go to dark wood 2 instead of the black marble. Now you see, that affects the squares. Now, just to make sure that's right, I'm going to go to camera view and go to perspective view, so I'm looking down on it. And I'm going to check and make sure that the dark wood looks proper. Automatic sizing. And I think that's correct. One of those. I'm going to go with that. So that's the dark wood, and right now it looks strange on the marble. Then we're going to go with a white, and we're going to do the same thing. Right now we got white marble. We're going to load a different image, and I'm going to go with bright wood. And so bright wood, I think that works. We'll hit automatic sizing, and if we change the map, we see that X is the best axis, and so there we go. So in this particular case, we can then go to use texture, and I'm going to go to the edge, and the edge is still marble, so we're just going to load a different image for that, and I'm going to there load the wood that I'm currently using for the table. How's that? And so now suddenly our chess set is a wooden chess set. I'm going to use the texture. Now the first thing we're going to have to do, well, actually I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just do the pieces. So let's say I go to pawn 1. Pawn 1, that's when I was just doing the pawns, and they're basically white. So I'm going to go with, instead of the white marble, I'm going to load the image of the bright wood. And once I do that, then I got wooden pawns, and use that texture. And I go to pawn 2, and same thing there. I will go with the dark wood 2, which we use for the pieces. So now we got light wood and dark wood. Use texture. And then in the case of the royalty, I'm going to go with the black. And the black, again, I will go with dark wood. And use texture. And finally the white. Let's see what that does. And we're just going to go with bright wood. And we're going to use that texture. Okay, so now our chess set is now wooden instead of marble. Now, for wood does not reflect the way marble does. And so I'm going to go through, first of all, I'm going to start with the pieces. Notice the reflection is very high, the glossiness is very high. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kill that glossiness. See the difference that makes? Now with the reflection, we can take that down to really low, because really wooden chess pieces don't reflect that much. And then if I go to the black, I'm just going to do the same thing. Just killing the glossiness has an immediate effect. And taking the reflection down a lot. And there, something seems to be off with the specularity. Maybe a little bit too much specularity, but we'll start with that. Actually, just make sure there's nothing wrong with that surface. Oh, that's right. Oh, that's sizing. Use texture. Looks a little bit too dull. So let's bring some of that specularity back. Maybe just a little bit of glossiness. Sometimes you got to kind of play it by ear. But that's about right. We want wider highlights. And then if we go to our pawn 2, we will take the glossiness down there. So the highlights get wider. And of course, we don't need to reflect. And maybe a little bit of glossiness. I could also diffuse it a little bit. Just taking that diffusion down helps a little bit. So that's close enough for now. And so then with the pawn 1, take the glossiness down. And that seems to get somewhere. kill the reflection a lot. Maybe turn the glossiness up a little bit so that it doesn't become overpowering. And so there you have a wooden chess set. And so one of the issues is that now it clashes horribly with the table. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go right to the table. And I'm going to change the table from wood to something else. How about I go with white marble? On max sizing. And I think that will at least provide some contrast. Now let's see what happens if I just do it that way. If I go back to camera view, now you see we could leave this alone. We could leave it alone because it basically works. I could, if I really wanted to, try to match those tables, in which case I would have to find a red marble that looks like that, but I don't really want to do that because I think we've already covered, we know that we can, so that means we don't have to. But what I might do is I might work on the positioning because we're seeing a little bit of extra reflection there. And really I just need to bring that wall back in. So if I were to go to Modeler, so if I wanted to actually fix that a little bit, all I'd have to do is move that wall in a little. And let's see what that did. Okay, and that's all we needed to do. So basically that gives us this scene with the understanding that maybe now we're on a counter and we're looking out at the diners. So I am just going to go ahead and hit my F9 key. And I am going to create this second version of my chess table. And you can see it just has a completely different look. And so I'm going to call this casual. So I'll go to PNG 24 and I'll put this in exports and I'm going to call it casual. And there it is. Okay, now one more. We're going to do one more. I'm going to make a high-tech version of this, which is difficult because those are not high-tech pieces. But the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go back to Surface Editor, and I'm going to go to my wall, and I am going to load in one more image. And I am going to choose this one. And so this is kind of like a high-tech place, let's say, with all kinds of electronics around. Let's say we don't really have to know that much about it to know that it is like a nightclub with flashy lights and stuff like that. So let's just pretend that that looks normal. And so we're going to then go to the black here, and I'm going to make the black something else. And so I'm going to go to my image, and I'm just going to say none. I'm just going to remove that altogether. In fact, I don't even have to do that. All I'm going to do is remove the texture, which will mean that there is no texture. It's just going to go with a color. And I'm just going to assign it a bright pink or something like that. And then I'm going to make it partially transparent, but also luminous. And I'll also need to make that double-sided if I'm going to do that. So we have a luminescent pink for our dark. And so then if I go to the whites, I can do the same thing. I can remove that texture. And then I can choose some sort of a darker color. So let's say we will go with a kind of a blue. And we can even make it that way, let's say. Or maybe a green. That might be a little brighter. And we will add some luminescence to that as well, as if there's a light underneath it somehow. And we will also give it some transparency. Reflections out, we don't need that, but give it some transparency and make it double-sided in case we need to see some sort of mechanism there. And we'll just go to the edge and we'll just remove that altogether as well. So remove texture, and actually that color suits me, and I'm going to leave that pretty much as it is, as if it's some sort of like a chrome chess system. Then I'm going to go to my pawn 1, remove that texture. So just remove the texture, so we're back to those pieces. And that will also be kind of a luminescent green. And we'll make them light up a little bit. And here's where it gets interesting. I really am going to go with the transparency. I'm going to make those partially transparent, but I have to make them double-sided if I'm going to do that, so that they'll have those internal reflections. So add a little bit of luminosity to that. Even look like they're holographic. If I take the transparency down a little bit, I could also do this by adding a refraction to it so that it bends light a little bit. But I would say that that would pretty much do it, because we're going to leave the specularity alone, so it has that kind of a look. And so then if I go to pawn 2, I can then go to that one, and I can remove the texture from there. And from there we were looking at the pink. So I can go to that kind of a pinkish color. And of course there, we add the luminosity. Yeah, that works. And double-sided, and that transparency. So we have a little bit of that, maybe a little bit of refraction, so that we can see that they're actually separate from the completely transparent. And then that just leaves the chess royalty. So the black, once again, if we remove the texture, and I'll just go ahead and that's the pink one. And we said luminescence and double-sided, and of course semi-transparent. And what am I missing? A little bit of a refraction index. And transparency. So if they're completely transparent, okay, they're reflecting something. Okay, and so then for the black ones, or the white ones rather, and if we remove that texture, and we go here and give that the green, and there it is again, transparency and luminescence, and a little bit of refraction, maybe a little more transparency. And so that becomes something that we can work with. So let's say that that's pretty close to what we want, except for the table. And so the table, we're going to remove that texture as well. Let's pretend it's a glass table, which may or may not make sense. So we'll just go here and, oops, that's the wrong one. So that's in the first one. I have to go to table and remove the texture. And we'll just, what color do we want the table to be? The table can be kind of a, I think I'm going to try for that color there. So that's the table. It's luminescent, but it's also semi-transparent, so we can see through it. There is a refraction, so we can see, and it's double-sided. So that made a difference. Let's return. So it still has a reflection, transparency. So you can see a little bit of that. Now the refraction index, oops, turned the wrong thing on. Refraction, maybe that's too much. Okay, that's kind of doing it. That's reflection. Okay. And that just about covers it. So if I look at this now, I can just see this as a different world. This is a different style of chess set. And so if I hit my F9 key, you'll see that it creates this. And you see it's taking some time because it's actually going through and making all of those reflections and doing all the ray tracing necessary to do that. And we'll talk about what ray tracing is shortly. But this creates the final product. And so save that as PNG24 and into exports. And I'm going to call that high tech. And so there it is. And so let's say I'm meeting with the client. I go into exports and I talk about it. And let's say this is the first thing I show the client. This is my original idea. And then I say to the client, you could also go with a more high-tech look or a more casual look. You could also do weird effects with this. You could have this, because they're essentially the same image, you can have them kind of switching back and forth at random, doing weird stuff. And so this can become the basis for an effect. Okay, so why did I do all this? Because I was bored. Also because it's fun. And so that's what I want you to think about. Don't think of this as work. Don't think of this as something you have to do. Think of it as something that you can build on to create other things. And it can be an incredible experience, honestly.